Hello, hello, and welcome to DLD Sync. My name is Steffi Czerny. I'm the founder of DLD. I am so happy that you are joining us for a very timely and important session of our interactive webinar series. Today, DLD Think will be all about society, politics, and the economy. The impact of Corona crisis and the urgent question, how do we recover from the pandemic as individuals, as human beings, and also as a society? What role does government play in this recovery? Where can we expect to see the biggest changes in the economy? And most importantly, what kind of world do we imagine? Do we want to live in tomorrow, once the worst will be over? We have two outstanding speakers today who are experts at finding answers to questions like these. My good friend Marietje Schaake and Douglas Rushkoff. Both are DLD speakers. Both have been at the DLD conferences, and they will be moderated and introduced by my colleague Carson.
Yes, is this working?
I can hear you, Carson.
Okay, my apologies for this. This is technology. We all live in a world controlled to some extent by technology. We will get into this a little more soon. So let me start again introducing myself. I'm Carson. I'm an associate editor with DLD. I take care of the news website and will be moderating, as you heard. Let's get back to our participants. Marietje Schaake is the International Policy Director of the Cyber Policy Center at Stanford University in California. She's also a former member of the European Parliament, originally from the Netherlands. Her work focuses on cybersecurity, disinformation, digital democracy, artificial intelligence. Welcome, Marietje.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Are we catching you in Amsterdam or in California right now?
Yeah, I'm in Amsterdam. I've been here since the start of the lockdown. And to be honest, with all the policies coming out of the US administration, I'm not quite sure when I can return, but I look forward to seeing my students and colleagues at Stanford again face to face.
Okay, very good. Thank you for joining us again. And then on the other side of the Atlantic in New York City, we welcome Douglas Rushkoff, who's known as one of the thought leaders of the digital transformation. Douglas is a professor of media theory and digital economics at CUNY Queens. He's written an astonishing 20 books, congratulations, including Program or Be-Programmed, Digital Nation, and Team Human, which is his most recent book. And Team Human is also the title of a highly recommended podcast that Douglas hosts regularly. So welcome, Douglas, and let's get right in. So the year is already, of course, feeling endless, even though we've barely passed the half watermark. Many people are longing to go back to normal. I would like to ask both of you, what are the chances of quickly getting back to some kind of normalcy? And should we even want to go back to what we used to know before the pandemic hit? Marietje.
Well, I realize that a lot of people want an end to the uncertainty. They want to know that they can go out and see their friends and colleagues, send their kids to school while staying healthy. But I actually talk to a lot of people who have used the time that they were forced to stay inside, to stop traveling, to slow down for some reflection. And I also talk to a lot of people who do not want things to return to normal, who are hoping that we can create a better society together, a better way of engaging. And I certainly think that they will be helped by the circumstances, in the sense that things will not fly back into normal. I think traveling will be challenging for a long time. Big group gatherings will be challenging. And also, the economic impact will be felt for a long time. So on the positive side, on the optimistic side, I hope this will lead to creativity, for a renewed appreciation for what is really important in our local communities, our neighbors, our family, our connections to others, not on the other side of the world, but really also around the corner. When I'm more pessimistic, I worry a great deal about the blame game that is about to happen when the peak of the crisis is behind us, the potential but also perhaps predictable rise of populism and nationalism, and the blaming also on immigrants and others that we so often see when times are tough. So without only looking at the opportunities and the better world that we can work towards and dream about, we must also protect those very values of openness, freedom, and human rights that we think are precious and that I fear may come under pressure. I hope I'm wrong, but I would not be surprised if more fascist and xenophobic forces will also take advantage of the concerns that people have.
That's a frightening thought, of course. Douglas, I saw you nodding a lot.
Yeah. Ditto? Am I allowed to say that anymore? Do the people know what dittos are?
Yes.
It's not. They're not. I'm not so old. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there's a both a crisis of values and of value, you know, that we're going through right now. I do agree that, you know, locked up or in lockdown and living the way we are, a lot of people are, particularly people of privilege who have the luxury to do it, are reevaluating their value system. What am I really living for? Why was I trying to earn so much money? Why don't I spend time with my kids? I mean, what we now lovingly call white people's problems, you know, in terms of those who have had a choice and who have put all of their, have been striving just to make more money or grow these companies and go into these cubicles and do meaningless things. They're thinking, I could have earned half the money and had so much of a better life and met this person who's my wife, and, you know, all these things that I didn't do. So there's that possibility. The other possibility, I mean, where I get hopeful in a way is, you know, I look back to the 2007, 2008 financial crisis, and sometimes I think, it wasn't severe enough to wake us up from the systemic problems in growth-based corporate capitalism. It wasn't enough that people still thought, oh, if we give money to the banks and they lend money to factories and factories hire people, we'll get jobs and employment and GDP will go up and all that. And I feel like this crisis is big enough, you know, when the unemployment rate reaches a third or whatever of the country, then you can't fix it, even if we did have a functioning federal government in the states. We couldn't fix it from the top down anyway. That it's finally demanding that we develop some sorts of local resilience, local institutions, local economics, and mutual aid, all the kinds of things that really poor people or that Black people in America did really since the 1700s because they weren't allowed to participate in the real economy. That we'll start to see, if anything, we'll start to see the development of these bottom up, more circular, peer-to-peer exchanges of value that will allow people not just to survive, but potentially to thrive and develop an alternative way of doing things.
Marietje, do you agree that this is the moment where alternative models of the economy of society have a better chance than they used to have under other circumstances?
Well, I think one of the big differences between the US and Europe is the starting position that we come at. I mean, this is almost the biggest real life test of a social welfare system, which is under pressure because of demographic change. It's under pressure because some people don't believe in it, but it's never been tested as it has been now. And we can see trust in government going up. And so I think the difference between the US, where the federal government has been failing, and governors and mayors have had to make difficult decisions for their own population, sometimes going against federal advice. In Europe, we also see, obviously, debate about, you know, what the best experts have to say and how to balance long-term economic impact and immediate health concerns. But states have intervened. For example, the Netherlands, a country that I know best, has offered a generous economic package to preserve employment, subsidizing 90% of wages as long as companies, whether they be small or large, would not lay off people. Mm-hmm. And this is only possible because there has been paying into the public purse. which is almost like, a no-go for many Americans, where taxation is a dirty word and government intervention is considered to be unnecessary. And I feel like reflection on that level, what do we need the public authorities, the government to do, and where can communities take care of themselves, is also being forced upon us. So I think in many ways, also what Douglas shared in terms of what he thinks will be a bottom-up process, will be self-organizing, may also come from necessity in the United States, not so much from a desire to take care of some of these needs by communities themselves. And so I'm curious to see what will come out of it. I'm sure there will be creative solutions and exciting ideas. What I worry about is that the pressure that people are going to come under is going to also lead to all kinds of effects that are not so much about community building and finding each other, but could really put people with their backs towards each other, could exacerbate existing tensions. And I think we must also prepare for the worst, even if these are uncertain times. I would rather be over-prepared for what could go wrong than to only be dreaming of a better society where neighbors take care of each other. I fear that the circumstances are such that that would be a little bit naive.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge for me is, and not you, but the people in my circle even, who talk about, yeah, Doug, I love the idea of, we're going to develop local currency to solve the trade problems. When they say, but we also have to prepare for the worst, I know, PhD level intellectuals in the New York suburbs who are actually purchasing weapons or building secret compartments for food in their basement in anticipation of when they get raided. So the the way that they're preparing for the worst feels like so much about like the American rugged individual defending his farm on the frontier. I mean, what are the I'm interested in what are the sort of more constructive ways that we can prepare for the worst that aren't so apocalyptic?
So in theory, of course,
this should have been done. Sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Well, no, I mean, I've been very worried about the possession of arms on the part of citizens in the US for a long, long time. Look at all the high school shootings and the victims of completely unnecessary violence between people. And, it was quite a stark image between what happened in preparation for the lockdown in the Netherlands, where people got in line to buy marijuana, and where in the United States, people got in line to buy guns. And right. I mean, it was a little bit funny. It was a little bit ironic. I mean, I didn't have to stock up on such substances here in the Netherlands either, but it's just very telling that this notion that people are ready to defend their territory or to wage weapons against each other, it's very dystopian in my eyes, and it's fundamentally different from what I'm seeing here. So in a way of preparing, I think it should also be thought leadership towards what are the core roles of government now? How can we build broad coalitions that go beyond the polarization, really in the national interest, and to answer to the emergency situation, especially when national leadership, as in the United States, is not uniting people. It is actually exacerbating polarizations and tensions, excluding entire groups of people, and also, really stepping and trampling on fundamental rights. So I feel like there should be broad coalitions, and I'm seeing the contours of that in the United States, with some people from, for example, the Republican Party saying, we're drawing a line here, we're going to work with Democrats to change. Now, that's a political example, but I could also imagine that companies actually step up, and I would appeal for them to do so, even if they may not be forced by law, to actually take their responsibility and look at what they can contribute to societies in need. Because as we see now, in the way in which people are responding to Facebook and other social media companies, the pushback against what is considered immoral behavior of all kinds will probably also be much stronger. So there's a real opportunity for people to look beyond their own self-interest, even though needs might be significant. If you can bear it, if you can spare it, to actually look beyond the self-interest and to build coalitions around values, as you mentioned, but also in assisting others where governments may fail.
So let me tie in there, because social media, of course, and is a very important keyword in this respect, especially when we look to November and the elections in the US, but we see this phenomenon all over the world. The question is then, are governments even still sort of able to steer the debate, or do people simply debate whatever they want in social media, and then the Mark Zuckerberg, Twitter, all these platforms, they kind of have to control these platforms in different ways in order to prevent an increasing polarization, like you put it in the beginning.
Well, I mean, I might sound again hopelessly optimistic, but I don't believe that governments as such can lead. But I don't think that they automatically get the respect or leadership capability, but that people can inhabit government in ways that I think people can lead people. I think there are human beings around who are capable of leading us, and we see them in the States. The best leaders are coming out of social justice movements and counterculture movements, whether it's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Alicia Garza of Black Lives Matter. We're seeing there are, and it's not just charismatic, TV style leadership, but we are seeing certain new kinds of leaders emerge who do galvanize large groups of people across many different constituencies. It's just a matter of those people inhabiting government rather than some of the people who've earned votes. People are not voting for leaders now; they're voting for television stars.
But isn't this
play leaders on TV?
But isn't this kind of a consequence of the media age and people recognizing people that they know from TV? They feel almost like they know them, even though, of course, they don't.
It is. I would argue it's the last gasp of television. It's. I mean, and as a media theorist, I probably think too deeply about this kind of stuff. But I feel like television, in competing with the internet, created these kinds of fake interactive reality shows. The internet is so much more, the net is so much more about on the ground reality, whereas television was about the illusions, about storytelling. And there's this transition period of which Trump and The Apprentice and American Idol are symptomatic of this transition of the effort of TV to kind of hang on to what's going on. But I think as we move more fully into a genuinely digital age, we could end up with different kinds of influence. Even Facebook, to me, is not truly digital media. Facebook uses the model of television. It's surveillance capitalism. That's about stoking consumerism through mass media. And that's why we're all so nauseous from it, because it's not good media. It doesn't make anyone feel better, think better, or act better.
Then again, some 1.7 billion people seem hooked on this. Marietje, are you similarly optimistic that in the longer run, this will all play out well?
Well, you started with the question of what should governments do, and I think there's a misunderstanding that intervening from democratic governments would lead to restricting of speech. It can actually also enable speech and put checks and balances on the very, very powerful builders of the architecture of our information systems, advertising companies like Facebook, like Google, like YouTube, and many others. And I do think that we have to go to a solution that puts democracy first. I mean, democracy is under pressure globally from populist and nationalist and so-called illiberal forces in a lot of our open societies. But there's also risk from a sort of wholesale privatization of governing of everything that's digital. And I think that is not going to lead to outcomes that are going to lead to deliberation, to consideration for minority voices, whether it's political minorities or ethnic minorities or people who may otherwise not be heard. It cannot just be commercially motivated who gets to speak. And so in that sense, I don't think that there's a sort of lively public debate happening on social media. I think we must really look at the sort of the back end of how the model works, which is the gathering of data, the micro-targeting of individuals. And I think it is absolutely legitimate to look at whether micro-targeting and being able to really reach people with a combination of data analysis in ways that are unprecedented, and to ask ourselves, is this in line with the fundamental rights and freedoms that we had in mind as open societies? And I think in Europe, we're a little bit further along in answering that question with something needs to happen. That doesn't mean that every intervention is the right one, but without a deliberate choice of policies putting democracy first, I fear that we're very, very close to a tipping point, if not already beyond it, where the commercializing of the public sphere online has devastating consequences, and it will be really, really hard to rein it back if we don't act now.
Yeah, I mean, because in America, we were under this false impression here, many of us, that the rules of the market are not rules. They don't exist. That's freedom. Whereas the rules of government, oh, those are the big restrictive rules that are going to come in. So we act as if the playing field of social media, when government isn't regulating it with democratic rules, is somehow a free zone, a wild, wild west. And it's not at all. It's totally biased towards the biggest players in the market. It's driven by algorithms that are leveraging certain human anti-democratic effects in order to maximize views and engagement. So it's a highly, highly specifically regulated digital landscape that engenders fascism, really. I mean, that's what it engenders. And even sadly, even from some progressive corners, we end up seeing a kind of extremism and closed-mindedness and a narrowness and a hostility that, again, doesn't reach across borders. We end up with these poor people hating those poor people and the wealthy laughing all the way. Finally, we're at a point now, though, where the wealthy are realizing that, oh my gosh, I'm actually still connected to all these poor people I've been exploiting. I can catch this same disease, unlike poverty, which I can't catch. I can actually catch COVID from these people. So maybe I have to somehow, rather than just trying to earn enough money to insulate myself from the reality I'm creating by earning money in this way, maybe I have to start spending some of my effort making the world a place that I don't need to insulate myself from. And finally convincing the rich of that is what's leading to some of this top-down transition.
So I can't help but feel reminded of one of your recent Team Human podcasts, where you said that basically the wealth of somebody like Mark Zuckerberg was like a multi-billion-dollar abscess, like a big infection, a pocket of pooled money that's dragging him down. It's not healthy. That's a wonderful observation. Definitely thought-provoking. The question is, of course, would the wealthy see it the same way, and what to do about it?
The wealthy do eventually realize that they're sitting on this festering capital. And then they start wondering, well, how do I shove it back into the system? So you get, whether it's Bill Gates starting a foundation and trying to, give nets to people in Africa so the mosquitoes don't give them malaria. And then the people use the nets to try to catch fish, and they kill the life in the streams on which they're depending. I mean, you end up, if you're going to give back, as even Mark Zuckerberg says, he wants to give back 90% of his money to charity over the course of his life, it means he took too much. In other words, and it means that, well, if you're getting to give back 90% of your money, then what if you had made Facebook 90% less coercive, less, you didn't have to do all this nastiness. If it was 90% less awful, we might not be living in the society we're in. So yeah, it's helping these people understand that money is not something to collect, but money is something to keep in circulation, that these are poker chips. They're not yourself, so we end up with these folks like Bezos and Zuckerberg who have a kind of financial obesity. They've ended up accumulating money that they can't use. And if they're systemic thinkers, as they should be, what they'll realize is, oh, wow, I've put something in motion that's pooled our nation's or our world's resources in one place and made them inaccessible to others. And I have nothing I can really do with it anyway, except maybe try to build rocket ships.
Marietje, there's one thing I want to come back to, because I feel that we've talked a lot about the agents behind these platforms, the makers, as well as the governing bodies. But ultimately, it's us who make these companies, these services so popular and so successful. So how much of, why is nobody switching to other services and platforms if we see the negative effects and if we feel something needs to change?
Well, I think it's all a question of agency and a proportionality of power. Basically, as an individual internet user and consumer, when you're asked to look at the terms of service and to agree to them in order to access the free service, then essentially you alone are up against teams of lawyers that have been working for years and years and years to make it easy for you to think, well, this looks acceptable and agreeable. It's also time-wise much easier to click yes than to go through pages and pages and pages of legally formulated text. So we don't really ask people to know everything about the medication that they're going to take. We don't ask them to know exactly how a car works before they get behind the wheel. In fact, we have mechanisms of oversight and consumer safety and protection of rights and health baked into our system. And I think the same needs to happen with social media platforms and, broadly speaking, technology companies in many, many ways, because there's no reason why such a powerful sector or such a powerful layer of our entire society should not be held to the same standards in the public interest as other industries. And one of the reasons why that is so hard is because in the United States, we don't just see accumulation of wealth on the part of CEOs, which is one thing which is rightfully scrutinized increasingly. You can only give back what you've taken in the first place. And the question is that, necessary? But there's also enormous wealth accumulation in the companies. And the companies are using it to hire lobbyists and legal experts and to apply the revolving door tactics, to fund political campaigns, to really optimize their own position, to establish foundations through which they fund civil society and academia. I mean, there's an incredible ecosystem around the thinking and the criticizing of technology that would not be possible if it would not be for the money coming from those very technology platforms. And I feel like that whole situation is not inducive to independent thinking, independent research, and independent oversight for that matter. So I would say with big power should not only come big responsibility, but also proportionate oversight, checks and balances. And that latter part is now long overdue. It needs to happen. And I feel like it will happen, probably in an imperfect way. But when you look at the contours of what's shaping up in the US and Europe, there's more recognition of antitrust and the fact that antitrust concepts and rules needs to be adapted for the digital age. There's more attention, long overdue, for the discriminatory effects, sometimes unintended, but of algorithmic and machine learning processes. There is scrutiny of who ought to decide what freedom of expression looks like and to assess whether it's actually respected, not just a company saying, well, in 90% of the cases we're right. What does it even mean? 90% of what? How impactful were the takedowns or the interventions? And only when that kind of statement and that kind of effect of the power of companies can be assessed and rebalanced where necessary, are we moving in the right direction. And so I hope that with so much screen time and so much reliance on these systems, many people will realize that it's important to also look at what is going on. I think especially parents have been quite alarmed at how much time kids are spending online and the fact that it's necessary. A lot of scholars and experts are worried about the entering into the health sphere by big corporations in a way that's unprecedented. So I hope this moment can be a wake-up call about what we think is important and how we rebalance some of the biggest power brokers in our digital ecosystem.
Is it perhaps also a moment where these already dominant companies have a chance to become even more dominant? If you look at everyone in their own segments, of course, have become even more successful, whether it be Google or Facebook or Amazon. And then we saw, for example, in Europe with the contact tracing apps, that basically it was Apple and Google ultimately again calling the shots because they own the mobile platform, and you can't really be successful as long as they are the gatekeepers and say, no, your approach is not as good as our approach. So ultimately, will they be even come out of this with even more momentum?
It's hard for them
Yeah,
not
I think we
to.
see it happening. And so, yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Douglas.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting when you were speaking, I was thinking about how I spent maybe 10, 20 years trying to change consumer behavior, telling people, look at what the platform's doing to you, look at what it's doing to your brain, look what it's doing to your social life, look at what it's doing to you economically. They're bad, they're bad, they're bad. And, you know, how many times can I quit Facebook publicly and still have no one follow? I'm going now, come on. And then, you know, 3 people follow. And the importance in what you shared is that it's the consumers are up against such systemic power. So when you say, you know, oh, if the Uber's bad, why can't they just join another taxi service? And it's because Uber has, you know, $1 billion or whatever, or multiple billions of dollars to lobby towns and to gain unfair advantages, to get access to airports and this. And the thing that they have is this war chest. So if you really want to try to disempower these companies, you have to look at how are they getting that war chest? That's from investors. That's if they have a good road show, a good dog and pony show, or whatever they call it, and they end up with $10 or $20 billion to use, they're not spending it on the app. They're spending it on their lobbying. They're spending it on their unfair practices. They're spending it on the establishment of kind of proto monopolies through which to become the only player in town. So if we really do, and I would think the listeners of DLD, some of them are real investors, they should realize that the investment dollars are proxy votes in what kind of a world you want to see. So when you're looking at a company to invest in, I know all we're taught is to be an angel investor and look at, you know, ROI and whether they're going to get 100x or 1000x returns. But if instead you're looking at what is being externalized in this business plan, what's being externalized to labor, what's being externalized to the users, what's being externalized to the environment, what's being externalized to the municipal, to the public sector, and then think, oh, is that something I want to be doing? Is this the world I want to be investing in? I think that is a high leverage point for some change.
Marietje, anything to add?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I really like this notion of, you know, sort of constituency also on the part of investors. I think they are the players that are often overlooked, but that are immensely powerful. And I hope that they're now also assessing, especially after the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, that some of this is really fragile right now if corporations don't take their democratic and societal responsibilities. And you know, we're not only facing a challenge after the pandemic and of fundamental injustices like racism that need to be resolved, and growing inequality and looming recession and economic crisis. Globally, there's also fierce competition for more authoritarian systems. And I feel like it's really important that companies that have really benefited in unprecedented ways from sprouting and growing in free societies give back and show loyalty to the values of those societies, help make them better, instead of just extracting economic value for a handful of shareholders, including these investors, and just, you know, leaving the cost, the externalities that Douglas mentioned, which are extremely important for the public to solve. That asymmetry needs to be corrected in favor of democracy, both for what's needed in our societies, but also for the unmistakable battle that's happening globally and where democracies are in relative decline. And I feel like this moment is also being exploited by authoritarian states with their own narratives, their own stakes, and their own games, whether it's in the digital realm or in the, for example, public health realm right now. So it's really a moment to keep our critical thinking on at all times, and not to be distracted of what is really going on, and to ask for everybody, especially the most powerful actors, to take their responsibility.
How do you get them to actually do this beyond hoping for it?
Well, pointing to the price that they're paying if, you know, their inflated product suddenly deflates. I mean, just by an action of you know, powerful but still civil society organizations, Facebook share value dropped $55 billion in one day. Now, that is both a stark reminder of how much they could lose and how much they had on the balance, but also on how fast things can change. And I think that this is a moment where unexpected things can happen, where there's a lot of reckoning with some of the systemic problems in our society. And I would imagine a correction of the hyper-inflated, what do you call it, like stock market evaluations of these companies, market appreciations could actually really drop. And what is the legacy then? You know, where have investors put their dollars and what did they get in return? I would also not be surprised if the spotlight of criticism will be going in their direction soon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always concerned with the construction of how do we get people to anything. You know, how do we get people to think this way and get people to think that way? And there's all these, you know, webinars I end up on with these, you know, very well-meaning young white guys who've had ayahuasca experiences and now how do we get people to this and get people to that? And I'm always like, all right, you know, let's, you know, give people a little more credit than trying to get them. I mean, not to be, you know, Maoist, but people have to want to do things. I think what we can do is inform people so that they can then begin to get themselves to do whatever it is they need to. But this moment this moment by itself is getting people to think differently about things. I keep being reminded in this internet overuse. I'm reminded of when I was in high school and I was in a play where I was supposed to smoke a cigarette, and my dad found a pack of cigarettes in my jacket pocket. He took me out to the backyard, and he said, "Okay, you want to smoke? Here, smoke the whole thing." And he made me smoke cigarette after cigarette after cigarette until I was, you know, so sick. And I feel like people are getting that way now with the internet, with the lockdown, that they're just so nauseous of so much online activity that they're seeing these things differently. I think they are going to return to the real world, realizing that these things have great utility value, but they are not a substitute for lived experience. And they might use these things actually less less routinely and more intentionally and in a measured way.
So you're saying it's kind of like being locked into a KFC or McDonald's and for 3 months and getting sick of burgers and chicken wings?
Yeah.
Interesting thought. Let me refer to it. That's why I'm holding my phone here. Let me look at a couple of questions that we got from the audience. One is about a lot of money being pumped into the economy right now, and it goes into the usual channels. It doesn't go into reforming social policies, for example. And so the audience member here is wondering how this will play out in the future, how this will impact future economic policies. Do you see any signs of change, for example?
Well, I think a lot is happening at the same time. So I see bailouts of big companies, and that is met with a lot of criticism. But the argument is that a lot of jobs are at stake. As I mentioned, in a lot of European countries, there are employment-preserving subsidies happening, which I would say benefit people across the board, big companies, small companies. And obviously, if you zoom in on some of those effects, I'm sure there is some misuse to be found. But generally, the idea, I believe, goes in the right direction. On the EU level, the choice for the economic recovery and the injections that are made in light of the pandemic are very much tied to a Green New Deal, a green economy, and digitization on the basis of values. So I would say that, at least in Europe, the packages are tied to conditionality and an agenda of change. Now, that will be a hard task because I think mostly in times of crisis, people want to preserve what they have, and leaders will also be more cautious to rock the boat. And big government reforms when spending is growing is not easy, because a lot of these reforms were intended to actually balance the budgets more. And the disbalance in most budgets as a result of the pandemic is historic. So I feel like that's a space to watch, especially in countries that were long overdue to reform their government finances. I mean, there's big discrepancies across Europe in how far countries were with, for example, increasing the pension age, restructuring pension programs, tax programs and whatnot. So that will be a challenge. And I worry most that the bill is passed on to the next generation. And I think that that's unacceptable. So hopefully that will make people think twice when they're resisting any kind of change that doesn't immediately benefit them.
So, but Douglas, you said earlier the 2008, 2009 recession wasn't big enough to really rock the boat, to really make things change. Now, this is surely bigger. But if we then go back to saying, well, now's not the time to really do something different, how do we ever get to an alternative model of the economy?
Well, I mean, now's the time. If we don't do something different, we don't, a lot of people don't make it. A lot of people don't survive. And I think one thing that's slowly happening in the States is people are, even if they don't know the history of employment from the Renaissance, and when we went from being merchants and value creators to being employees who worked, by the hour, and the clock went on the tower in the medieval town, and, employment and wage earners were born. I think we still are seeing the two different functions of jobs. On the one hand, a job, we understand they're jobs of things that we need. We need the people making the food, or teaching our kids, or doing medical care, or, making water get to our house. And a lot of us are looking at our jobs and realizing that, oh, the only thing this job really does is justifies my getting a piece of the spoils. In other words, I'm not really doing anything of value to anyone. It's a created job. And while that's on the one hand, that leads to kind of an insecurity because you realize you're not needed. On the other hand, it leads to a kind of freedom. And I think we may be in a place where we start to realize, oh, there's only so much work. There's only so many jobs. So we're going to have to share them. We're going to have to share what jobs there are. You might only get to work 3 days a week rather than 5, and young people are really looking at, examples of what England was like in the late 1980s, when young people would go on the dole when they were out of college and become artists and do in some cases strange and wonderful things. That we may actually, our societies may be more prosperous than we're giving them credit for.
Very, very nice thought. Has echoes of a recent DLD Sync that we had with Isabel Welpe and Albert Wenger. For those who want to check it up, it's on our DLD News website. You can find all the archive of videos there and talks and highlights. We have another question which nicely ties in with this. The question is whether maybe the possibility of really making an impact, really changing things, is most prominently given in the digital realm, actually, with, for example, social media, and the comparison here is to big tobacco and soft drink makers, which for a long time ignored their impact on society, and it came back to haunt them, of course. So maybe it's there where we will see some rethinking and change of tack first.
I mean, if my inbox is any indication, yeah. I mean, because I'm not like a corporate consultant type. I don't know if you figured that out yet. I mean, I got that. My Google's got the handcuffs. It's gold handcuffs in there. I'm not, but I'm filled with public relations companies and corporations saying we've got to pivot towards social good. We've got to have positive impact. What can we do? How do we change our operations? How do we become a purpose-driven company? And they don't just mean in terms of their communications. How do they make commercials that make them look like it? But how can we pivot our operations? I mean, I haven't gotten one from an oil company yet, but certainly soft drink companies and consumer goods manufacturers and electronics manufacturers are looking at, what are we doing here? Why? And even CEOs who, because a lot of them are people too. You know, they really are. I mean, you've met them. They go to DLD things. They're thinking, I've got kids. I want my legacy to be different. I want to be known as the person who turned this company from a diabetes manufacturer into something, a place that made people healthier. How do we do that? How do we make that leap without antagonizing all our shareholders and everyone getting fired?
Yes, very good.
I truly hope so. I mean, for me, it's a little bit seeing is believing.
Yeah.
I hope that there's also a wake-up call happening on the part of lawmakers. I feel like it's quite remarkable how, you know, an advertising boycott has created more public debate than what lawmakers have achieved. And so maybe they feel like they have to step up a little bit. At least that's what I hope. And the concern I have, and this is just from, you know, having spent some time in Silicon Valley now, is that most people, CEOs included, but everyone working in companies, feel like their good intentions must lead to something good. And I feel like the reckoning on the part of a lot of these corporate leaders in social media and tech companies is to have to put that despite their good intentions, the outcomes have not been great. So it's, I think in that sense, important not just to think about what they want to do, but to really also ask for concrete results instead of wonderful promises. There's a long road to catch up before we get to anything better.
Marietje, to follow up, because you had a highly interesting speech that you gave in January at DLD 20 in Munich, where you said there's a big risk with more and more algorithms that make decisions that we're losing simply the view, there's not enough transparency. We can't see under the hood of the machine that drives our lives, so to speak. Do you see that increasing right now? What would be the way to counteract?
I think it has to be mandated. You're right. It's very hard to have a well-informed public debate, to have evidence-based policymaking, to have academic research or independent regulators really assess what's happening when companies are hiding the most crucial information behind trade secrets in algorithms. And, you know, there was a time where I said that the public or governments didn't know what was going on, for example, in like Google's algorithm or something. And then I talked to Google engineers and they say, there's not one single engineer that knows everything that's going on in our algorithm. You know, so the question is, who does still know? Honestly speaking, like, is there any logging, any accounting for any effort to try to understand what intended and unintended consequences are? And for example, the constant reiteration, you know, the process of machine learning and how it feeds back into processes that are digitized also means that there's basically no pause button. You know, Google's algorithm for search changes 3,200 times a year. So if I've been done wrong today, how can I prove that a week from now? Or if something big has changed and it suddenly discriminates against one population or another, or one product or another, or one geographical area or another, how will people there know? I feel like a lot of consumers are subject to all kinds of testing, like real life guinea pigs constantly. And it can have a lot of harmful consequences that we would never, ever accept in the offline world. And so if we could only rebalance the scrutiny that happens offline with online, or in analog products and services with digital services, we would make a big step forward. And a lot of governments say this, you know, on the EU level, at the UN level. The idea is that laws should apply online as they do offline. Wonderful, but they don't in practice. And that gap has to be closed in order to get somewhere, because the asymmetry between knowledge and access to information between companies and, let's say, public interest authorities and even individuals, journalists, civil society, parliamentarians, is growing and growing and growing and growing with every day that we don't intervene.
Yeah, and it's really hard to catch up, you know, and in a beautiful effort. I mean, at regulation, you know, Europe ended up with, you know, the GDPR. And so now we click OK before we let the website do bad stuff to us. You know, that's where we kind of ended up. And it's OK, so here's that. It's a nice reminder, but I feel like it's just it ends up just being just
Fig leaf.
yeah, exactly. And it's this cybernetic quality of the net is the part that's part of technology, is part of what's so dangerous about it. We're in a feedback loop with our technology. And it used to be that the feedback loop allowed for human intervention at each time it would cycle back. But now really we're just being acted upon, and the
Yes.
algorithms will change based on our resistance. And when we resist, then the algorithm will change. Oh, look, I can get in that way. And then the algorithm shares its information with all the other algorithms and they go, oh, this is working on those humans. And then you realize, oh, it's not even human beings, Gates or Bezos or Zuckerberg, not even human beings in charge of what's happening anymore. They've set algorithms in motion with certain commands: extract data, extract value, extract this from people by any means necessary. And now those platforms are really in charge of, certainly, of our digital world and increasingly of our real world. Once we're using algorithms to do prison sentences and we find, oh, look, they give longer prison sentences to Black people than white people. We don't know why, and we can't find out why, because the algorithm's proprietary. So we can't even look at the algorithms that are enacting what was supposed to be a democratic governance.
So here's a
Fully
question
agree.
actually. Sorry, here's a question actually that sort of substitutes this or ties in with this about who you can even trust with data. And the audience member here brought up services like mydata.org or digi.me as a way forward to create a data democracy rather than a data dictatorship or data monopoly. Are you familiar with these services? Would you say that yes, that could be an alternative, that could be a way out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with a few. I'm helping a guy named Paul Mayer with a data commons project. And I think that the more we can move data into the common space rather than private space, it does a few interesting things. I mean, first, if you can control how your data is used, so your data, you let your data be part of a commons, your medical data, and some of it could be traced back to you, other parts of it maybe can't, so that all sorts of research could be done, cancer research and health research of different kinds. But the other beauty of a data commons is it devalues data for the private sector. If we're giving away our data for free, then how is Facebook going to make money off our data? They can still, obviously they can still develop algorithms and manipulate us, but the data itself becomes a public good. And at least we can, in some ways compete for fair use with the data. So I'm familiar with some of them. I don't know each one, but I do like the idea of a data commons, and it doesn't seem beyond the means of a decent blockchain programmer.
But that would probably again have to be regulated, and because obviously those that make money, lots and lots of money off of data that they hoard and that they guard, will not open up by themselves.
Right, but their data becomes, their hoard of data is replicated elsewhere in a public commons. So it's a different, it's a little bit different. They're
okay.
What they have, but they can still
I think,
launch evil technologies.
No, I think the trust really has to be verified, both through technological modeling and encryption and decentralized working, so that people can verify that they're not moving from one big gatekeeper monopolist to a future other one. But there's also, I think, much more need to look at the governance of digitized systems, whether they're in private hands or in public hands. And the trust right now is very, very fragile, also in governments, by the way. And that's why I wonder, who would bring their data, for example, on health to another party. It strikes me how easily people share very sensitive data with big corporations, and how resistant they are when they're asked to share something. For example, now, a lot of the promises of contact tracing apps, people are worried about sharing their data. And I think that that's the right instinct. But at the same time, massive amounts of data about searches on I don't know, like kinky sexual preferences or secret destinations or medical details or new jobs or all kinds of very, very intimate questions are shared just like that with big corporations. So I think if we want to improve trust and if we want to make the public interest more resilient, there cannot be an assumption of trust. There has to be ability to verify and to independently look at. And I feel like those fundamentals of the rule of law can really be built into a lot of systems and thereby make them more trustworthy or accessible also for the average citizen. And that's where we need to go if we really want to democratize the use and the governance of technology systems.
Mm-hmm. Is either of you or both of you, are you using contact tracing apps? Nope.
We can't do
I'm researching
contact tracing
them
in the US anyway. I mean, it's not possible because people don't have a small number of contacts. It's, which it's a mess, but no, I'm not.
Okay.
I think there's been overpromising of the impact of contact tracing apps, and I think it's going to fly back in the faces of governments who may have lost trust along the way. Because, in the United Kingdom, in the Netherlands, governments have basically said, you, citizens, will not come out of lockdown if you do not download an app. And meanwhile, the government of the Netherlands is still in the process of developing the app. Lockdown is already lifted. Nobody has downloaded an app, and day after day, more problems are discovered, not only about alleged privacy promises or questions of cybersecurity or decentralization, but also about the use as such, or questions whether people want to give so much power and agency to companies like Apple and Google in this space. So I think the last word has not been said about contact tracing apps, or COVID apps more broadly even, despite huge promises and a sort of tech determinism. And so maybe that will prove to be a point where the promises were so inflated and the results so meager that it will help a reality check on tech more broadly.
Very good, thank you. I have to admit, I'm using the German one that was supposedly open source. Everybody that has a lot of transparency, and I hope I won't even get a notification, but I'm using it for sort of the protection of everybody, or to support this effort. Just to wrap it up, because I'd hate to end on a downer. What makes you optimistic about tomorrow when you get up in the morning, and also that we will come out of it as a sort of a better society?
I mean, for me, honestly, meeting you, Mariette, I mean, is inspiring to me that this work is happening, that you're having these kind of conversations with students at Stanford who are then going into these companies. I mean, you're doing knowledge production and dissemination that whenever I see it, and it's pretty rare, but I go, oh, we're going to be just fine, So thanks for this. Thanks for coming on this and just sharing such lucid observations and conclusions on this.
Well, thank you. I mean, what gives me hope are my students, to be honest. And just by being exposed to questions about, the relevance of the rule of law, what is at stake in democracy, a lot of them are reflecting on their own responsibility with so much tech knowledge and with a challenging future, but sort of common path into the big tech companies. I've had students who've shifted to wanting to go to law school, and so they make me very optimistic. And also, I have to say, the community initiatives that are happening, anything from people here. I mean, people live closely next to each other here in Amsterdam, and almost every house has a teddy bear behind the window so that kids can go bear hunting when they go outside. People are getting groceries for elderly neighbors, are really helping each other out. I've talked to people in my street and my community more frequently than I ever had before because of this lockdown, because the radius of our interactions has really shifted. I mean, I have only taken one flight in the last 4 months or so, which is something that hasn't happened to me for decades. So this rediscovering of what is truly important and trying to pave the way to magnifying the good things that have come out as a result of this pandemic, while being very mindful of the risk that things could get really ugly, is something that gets me up in the morning. I'm not only optimistic, but I do think we can all be agents for change.
Wonderful. I'm sure Steffi, who's waiting, love to hear that. Thank you both very, very much for such a wonderful, engaging discussion. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody out there joining us. I hope you had some intellectual stimulus and enjoyed the discussion as well.
Thank you too.
Steffi.
Thank you so much. This was really inspirational and very an active call to action for all of us. My dear audience, listening to the three of you, Carson, Marietje, and Douglas, wasn't it a wake-up call for you? What are you doing with it now? I really encourage all of you, dear listener, dear audience, not to only consume this, what you just heard, but go out and work on the agenda of change. As we heard, we need change. We need engagement. We need a much more active consciousness about the things which are going around us. Be engaged. This is what I give you for tonight. Thank you, Douglas. Thank you, Marietje. Carson was great. And maybe we'll see us next Wednesday at the talk of Hans Ulrich and Mariana Mazzucato, Hans Ulrich Obrist from Serpentine, and distinguished Professor Mariana Mazzucato, who is also a great voice in this agenda of change. And I really wish to see you all very soon in reality. Ciao.
Thank you, Steffi. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.